engage your partner, let's say, if there is something going on that you're saying, hey, I feel left out. I don't feel connected. I'm not getting enough. It has to be a conversation, and it should be something that couples talk about.
If porn or masturbation are used individually, sort of as a replacement or like as something that is done like in secret or so on and so forth, it usually becomes a problem.
And I'm just thinking of somebody who's having an affair.
Okay.
And then that affair gets exposed. It completely changes the relationship with the person they're having the affair with.
I think you just found our next topic.
Welcome to the Me and Us podcast, a conversation between two relationship therapists who talk about real life issues based on what they learn in a clinical setting, working with clients, and from their own experiences of motherhood, marriage, and parenting.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Me and Us podcast. I am Elsa, and this is Dr. Olivia, and we want to invite you today to continue the conversation about sex. I know that last time we recorded an episode was the first time that my husband heard our podcast, and he was like, oh my gosh, you need to talk more about more stuff like this. And so we were inspired to do so. And today we want to focus specifically on masturbation and porn.
I think we have to add sex toys because that kind of comes into masturbation.
I like it. Let's do it. Let's do it.
But we kind of, when we spoke last time about sex, it came up and it was like, oh my gosh, that's like a whole topic in of itself. And I think there's just so much to talk about when it comes to sex, right?
Yeah.
But I think masturbation and pornography are important because I see it a lot in my clinical practice. I mean,
does it come up on its own or do you have to yank it out of your client?
Yeah, it's not like, I don't think it's presented. I think it just kind of like slips in or somebody brings it up, know, but it's not, but it definitely, I would say pornography especially, I mean, it is such a big industry. It's, a 15 billion industry a year or more. I don't know, but I think that's a lot. So I think that means, people are watching it and, what do you think when you?
Well, I love that you just talked about it being an industry. I have clients that are in the porn industry.
Oh, wow.
Yes. And as producers and owners of companies. So it's been really interesting to hear more about the profession of being in the porn industry and the business itself, which is entirely different than the consumption of porn.
I'm more familiar with the consumption based, what comes up in the clinical room.
So it's certainly a hugely growing industry. And also the first thing that I think about is that there's porn in the more traditional stuff. Well, when I first looked at houses in Miami to purchase, one of the first ones we saw at the place where we now live used to belong to a porn producer. And he had a whole setup in his garage. I'll never forget that. And so that was one of my first experiences, understanding oh, this is how it's made. Because you're not, sometimes if you just see it or hear about it, you're not thinking about everything that goes behind the scenes. So that was interesting. But anyways, I think that nowadays porn is not just like that videotape that you would have bought a few years ago or that magazine or that YouTube video or wherever, Pornhub, OnlyFans. I mean, there are so many people are now producers of something that I think can be equated to porn. I mean, how do you define
sex
porn?
sells, right? I think that is, I'm thinking of it, I'm just thinking of how much it's practiced within couples. But when we were thinking of this, I always think of it as an individual practice. I don't see it as something that is done necessarily as much as with couples together. I think couples do sometimes, and it's a turn on. They watch it, and then they have crazy sex. But generally speaking, I think it is more something that you do alone. And if I had to say men, women, I would say definitely more men watch porn. I think know if it's for women.
70% of men are watching porn, but it is mostly more men than women that watch porn.
And I think, what is it? What makes porn attractive? It's certainly, I would say, an outlet It's I think there's pluses and minuses, when you
Yeah.
think of it, how does it affect the couple relationship?
So many thoughts. One is that so many of us are visual consumers. So we need to see things visually. We like photography, we like colors. So porn really brings something to life that you can visualize. And that's a very important stimulus for a lot of people. Some other people are more in tune with other senses, but porn really is like an easy way to feed.
Okay, and I have to add to that. One thing that just popped in my mind is the number one thing that I think porn offers, for men at least, is that the woman always wants it. And she is into it. And she is, oh my gosh, she is having orgasms and she just can't get enough of it.
Yes.
And I think for men in particular, that is the biggest thing. It's maybe liberating. They don't, because I don't think that's always the case in the bedroom. And I think for at least, the man is in charge. The man always has an erection. The man is, just doing all kinds of things, and the woman wants it.
Yes.
And
in a very visual way, which is interesting. How they can make that come to life. So I think that the visual aspect of it is something interesting to consider, especially if you are trying to consume less porn for whatever reason. Maybe how to replace that visual stimulus with something different. So here's my question for you. What do you think about making your own porn with your partner? What about creating your own visual stimulus, filming yourself,
role play, dressing up,
or even recording it or taking pictures? I don't know.
I mean, I've never thought of it like that. I've thought of it as, maybe because a lot of porn, they're stories. It's acting, and they they have the storyline going on, and so I was thinking more of okay, that's kind of acting and role playing.
Yes,
I think that's great for some couples, who
do you think that would be considered porn if you're just filming yourself? I don't know what the technicalities are.
I don't know. I just think of it more as what makes it. And I guess this is a question I would love to ask more people. What makes porn good and attractive? What is it that you like about it? But to me, the thing that really stands out to me is that the woman is, and I think that sets up couples sometimes for challenges. The woman in porn always wants it. She is just there, available. She's enjoying herself. It's passionate. And I think that is not the best thing. If you watch porn a lot, which comes up in therapy with a partner, I mean, in some relationships, it's cheating.
Yes.
It's not. So I think it can bring all kinds of stuff. But I think one of them is, for couples, it can set up for an unrealistic expectation of what the woman should bring in the bedroom, or the man.
Yeah.
But I think that's part of to me, what stands out to me as being
a difference.
Yeah. Sort of the pleasure. It's always,
hyped up.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it is shown, I think research shows that most porn depicts an unrealistic version of what, sex looks different for everyone, but that they do present an unrealistic picture of it. And obviously our body has a whole physiological response that makes us want it more. And porn is, for many, considered an addiction because you get addicted to the dopamine and the feeling that it generates. So it is something that becomes a thing that you start craving and a feeling that your body starts wanting. So, that's obviously when it becomes an addiction, and there are criteria to measure if it is or isn't. I guess what I'm thinking about is, if you bring it back to the couple itself, and you think about your sex life and your partner's sex lives, are you having conversation about porn? When you're meeting someone and dating, have you asked them, do you watch porn? Because I'm thinking about what you said, is porn cheating? I think it would depend on the couple, and is it a surprise?
I think it's
finding
different.
out all of a sudden that my partner or my husband, whatever, keeps looking at these things and I had no idea. right?
And I think for a lot of couples, it's an issue where either it's consumed. I think it can raise a lot of questions in a relationship, and I think for some it's completely acceptable, but it also, like, how much are you watching porn? I think it all, it's like, what exactly is happening? But I think for some couples it's an act of cheating, it's an act of betrayal, or the spouse doesn't want sex as much with their spouse, or it sets up for unrealistic expectations. I think anal sex is a huge thing in porn. So like, a lot of that is, you're watching that, and then, you want that in the bedroom, and then your partner doesn't want that. Or, I think it can be very healthy. But when I think of, masturbation too, I think of it more of things that are done alone.
Yeah.
And I think it would be wonderful to bring that into the couple more, if couples actually had conversations about it.
Right. So if I can summarize my stance on it, and what I've seen from my clinical work is, if porn or masturbation are used individually, sort of as a replacement, or like as something that is done like in secret or so on and so forth, it usually becomes a problem. If it is something that is done in the context of the relationship and both people kind of are aware or incorporate it into their joint experiences, it can be something that brings a lot of like diversity and pleasure and fun. And so that's, I think, the biggest distinction.
I think, when I think of masturbation and women, I think there's so many vibrators out there now that have been really great for women in particular, right? Because it's also something they can bring into the bedroom, practice with their partner. I think that is happening a lot because not all women orgasm during sex.
Yes.
And so I think that I hear much more that can work.
Yes.
But I've also, seen and heard, or sort of the downside of that, I think, is that women can rely on this vibrator as something that gives them instant pleasure. They can have multiple orgasms back to back.
Yes.
And the same thing with porn, right, that we were talking about before, can happen with women and vibrators, where they end up saying, you know what, sex is too much work. I'm tired. I can just use my vibrator and I'll come in, a few minutes, and that's and I think you can become lazy and not make enough effort then for having sex with your partner, which takes more time and effort and work.
Lazy and desensitized. If you rely too much on porn or on masturbation and vibrators or sex toys, you can find yourself then unable to connect to the moment of just like,
it becomes,
let's call it plain vanilla sex, even if it's not that plain vanilla. It can just become, it can drive a huge wedge, I think.
Yeah, because it becomes like it creates that distance again of, okay, women are using their vibrators, they're, getting off that way. Men are watching porn. I think also when couples travel and they spend time apart from each other, you rely more on these things, right? And so, how do couples, how can they have a conversation about this and make this more of a joint thing, or both and, right? Versus
both
like
and.
either or.
Yes. I love the idea of both and, because, there is a practicality or efficiency in just like being able to take care of yourself and the independence of giving yourself pleasure and orgasm that I think is great. But then if you're just doing that, it really creates a huge disconnect. And to some degree, we're taking away from the relationship that very special place where you are vulnerable and you give, you open up the space for somebody to give you that pleasure, which I think is such an important part of connecting.
Well, and I also think it's not like we have to figure it out as we sort of, use, let's say you're using sex toys, you're using vibrators. How do you use it when you're, having sex or during foreplay? And I think couples, like, there's no like, you have to figure it out together. It's not like it's such an easy thing and everybody knows what they're doing.
Yes.
I think there has to be room for, like, you are learning this as you're going along as a couple, what works, what doesn't work. The same with pornography, I think again, every couple is different. For some, it's not an issue. If one watches it and does it, they're still having a healthy sex life. I think great, fine. If somebody doesn't, approve of it, then there has to be a conversation about that. Maybe that person can be included and,
Right.
You can make it more a couple thing versus just like one person is watching porn and then, I don't know. I think there's lots of complexity to it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think what comes to mind as like something to strive for is like variety. Can you work on having orgasms like just through masturbation on your own and then with your partner? And then, if you want to explore, do you explore different things? Because when you become dependent on just the one avenue for pleasure or the one avenue to get turned on or the one avenue to have an orgasm, then becomes very like one dimensional, and it is bound to translate into a disconnect in pleasure. I think also one thing I was thinking about is performance anxiety. And I think men that watch a lot of porn, I don't know that they realize this at first, but I've worked with a couple of clients who then realize, they're usually looking at the girl and like, is she living up to the image that I have of the porn I watched? Yes or no? But then what I think starts happening without them realizing is, if this woman isn't showing pleasure the way that I usually see a woman show pleasure during porn, how does that reflect on me? What am I doing wrong? And so without really knowing, I think they hold themselves to a standard that is unattainable.
Because the man always can perform in porn. The same way women, I was saying, yeah, it's just not realistic, right? And I think it's all about quantity. And I think you can lose perspective if you're overindulging in something that is just not realistic, right? Because at the end of the day, it's filmed, like you said, it's a production, it's a storyline. And
to me, that has been such a privilege to have more insight into the fact that this is an industry. This is produced like behind that screen that a person is seeing, because probably most of it is now through screens. There are cameras and there are people watching and directing, and there are, all of these things happening. And so I think that if you're going to consume it, and you can also keep that in mind, this is not real life, then I think we start having a little bit more conscious as to what it is we're really watching.
And how do you gauge that? I mean, how, because I think it's a huge industry. It's not going away.
Oh, no, it's not.
It's here to stay. But how do you, how do you gauge as an individual, and this goes for women too, who watch porn or masturbate, how do you assess if you're doing too much of it or if you're losing perspective or, what goes into that?
So the questions that I wanted to share today have a little bit to do with that. And it's like paying attention. If I find myself masturbating more than usual, how do I take that as an opportunity to think, what is happening in my relationship, for example? If we haven't had sex in a really long time, first of all, do I notice? Second of all, if I do notice, what do I do with that? Do I just go take care of myself separately, or do I approach my partner and say, hey, what's going on? Or just try and initiate sex? So I think a lot of it is just like noticing how some of the things you may be doing individually are affecting your ability to then connect or not connect when you're wanting to have sex.
I think
so
it
that
absolutely,
connection, that constant connection.
I think observation, it always begins with that. I think you have to observe yourself, but I think you also have to engage your partner. Let's say if there is something going on that you're saying, hey, I feel left out, I don't feel connected, I'm not getting enough, then it has to be a conversation. And it should be something that couples talk about. I think openness, direct communication is always better than sort of like just doing these things, alone and separately. And you have to speak up to those things. But I think, yes, you have to observe yourself and say, is this working? Is this not? What do I do about this then, if it's not?
Let's look at these questions for 1 second. Related to kind of like assessing the correlation between like masturbation and porn and then your sex life, how it actually translates into real life. I was thinking, what happens to the frequency with which you and your partner have sex before and after you masturbate? Is there a correlation between like more masturbation and less sex or not? Because I think that, I guess with that question, I'm trying to ask people to pay attention to see if masturbation is becoming a replacement for just like sex and intimacy with your partner. It doesn't have to be, right? But just pay attention to that.
Right. And when is it happening? Like, do you notice a pattern of like, what are the times that you do masturbate? Is it when you're under stress? Is it when you're bored? Is it, before sex? I don't know. But I think that's an interesting.
So like, do I find myself masturbating after a period of like no sex with my partner? And if so, was it difficult to think of, bridging and going up to them and saying, hey, I miss you, and initiating sex, and it just felt easier to just take care of your needs, right? So just kind of like understanding that, or, or the other way around. So that was one question I had.
So I have a question. If you engage in masturbation and or pornography alone, what would be ways to include your partner to make it a couple activity? What difference would that make in your relationship to your partner, but also with masturbation and pornography? How would that change your relationship to that then, if it became more something that was included in your couple?
Immediately, I think that if you bring your couple in, pornography can stop being something that I guess you consume outside of real life and becomes like an interactive experience in real life.
And I'm just thinking of like I was just thinking of like somebody who's having an affair.
Okay.
And then that affair gets exposed. It completely changes the relationship with the person they're having the affair with.
I think you just found our next topic.
And that's how I kind of think of this. Like, how does it change?
I love that. I love that. Whoa. And is part of your connection to porn and masturbation the fact that someone doesn't know the secrecy? Is that part of the turn on?
Exactly.
And if you get caught, does the turn on disappear?
Does it deflate and it doesn't become?
Yeah. I love that. Very cool question. What happens to your creativity and imagination when you watch porn? Does it inspire you to fantasize and bring new ideas to the bedroom or wherever you like to have sex? Or does it leave you more like comparing and having your mind elsewhere in that porn scene as opposed to like connecting in the moment?
Yeah.
So like, how do you kind of notice what's happening to you and your imagination when you are having sex?
Who are you thinking of? What's going on in your, what are you imagining? Are you, that's
because some people
so
will get it as inspiration. It can be like a little Pinterest, I guess. And you're like, let's try this here and there. Or you can find yourself like being unable to see your partner and just having your mind elsewhere and fully disconnected. And so like, I guess to some degree, the question is like, does porn work for you or not in having a fulfilling in-person relationship? Or
does it become just completely focused on what you're watching, and being it's more a transaction, it's just, it's fulfilling a cause. It's a turn on, it's like a progression, turn on, and then, some act and orgasm. And it's just like that's what it fulfills, versus like, I don't know. I mean, I think it's interesting because I think women and men would be different in that way. Women may be fantasizing or, thinking about all kinds of things, versus men, it's more focused on the actual act of just what they're watching. I don't know. I'm interested.
Something to
we
think
need
about.
To do a poll and ask.
We need some avenues to get answers to these questions. So please share.
So my other question would be, how would you define what masturbation and or pornography offer you? So interesting. So much to think about.
This was fun. Maybe this is also an idea for a future topic, but this lingering thought that I have is that one thing that porn and masturbation, if you're doing it on your own, don't have is the relational anxiety that comes up when you have to initiate or reject someone. So, that's like one way to have sex without having to worry about.
It takes the pressure away.
Takes the pressure away. So I think we need to talk about initiating and rejecting sex.
You're more removed from that, right? I mean, it's interesting. It's sort of, I was just thinking of like social media, and how we are so removed, but we get so connected
so close, yet so
close
far.
to these people we don't know, but we follow them and we watch their stories, and
and we're protected from the actual relational dynamics and anxieties.
Being
vulnerable, and
that you're not that. It's
Do you want to just keep going for an extra half hour?
We could, right?
Well, we
so
could.
much.
We will.
Yeah, we'll have more on sex. I think there's just so much to talk about. And
yes,
thank you for this.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for listening, everybody.
Interesting conversation.
All right.
And email us at
the
Me and Us podcast at gmail.com.
We will learn our email address at some point.
If you have any questions or topics that you would like us to cover on here. Until the next one.
Yes. Bye.
Bye.